Welcome, everyone. What I'm about to share with you today is not just my story, it's a demonstration on how understanding trauma narratives can really transform your entire relationship with healing. From a psychodynamic therapeutic perspective, a trauma narrative is a structured storytelling process that helps us bring meaning to our experiences, particularly those involving intergenerational trauma and our inherited patterns. Unlike traditional talk therapy that kind of focuses solely on, let's say, present symptoms, trauma narratives recognize that our current challenges have these roots that extend far beyond our individual lifetimes, reaching back through generations of our ancestors who have faced their own struggles, their own adaptations, and really their triumphs. Now, trauma narratives can be done with current conscious trauma, the things we remember happening to us, and also trauma that resides in the body on a cellular level in my bones and running through my blood. I'm going to talk about how this works with my own ancestral healing journey. A trauma narrative serves as a bridge between the unconscious and conscious mind, allowing us to really transform fragmented memories, inherited patterns, and unexplained emotional responses into a coherent story of resilience and strength. Are you feeling excited about this? This therapeutic approach recognizes that trauma is not just an individual experience, but a collective one passed down through families and communities across generations through what research calls epigenetic inheritance and cultural transmission. Ah, Let's see what we get into. The power of the trauma narratives lies in their ability to reframe our understanding of inherited challenges. Instead of viewing difficult patterns as personal failures or random misfortunes, trauma narratives really can help us recognize these patterns as adaptive responses that our ancestors developed to survive extraordinary circumstances. When we understand that our anxiety might be connected to ancestors who have lived through families and that our hypervigilance might stem from ancestors who face persecution, we might begin to honor these responses while consciously choosing new patterns for our own lives. Psychodynamically, trauma narratives work by integrating split off parts of the psyche. When we see our struggles as part of a larger ancestral story of survival and adaptation, we move from shame and isolation into connection and empowerment. The narratives, the narrative process helps us identify not just the wounds that have passed down, but also the strengths, the wisdoms, and resilience that flow through our ancestral lines. How beautiful is that? Trauma narratives contribute to healing in several key ways. First, they provide context and meaning for experiences that might otherwise feel overwhelming, um, and can really invade our trauma response system, our nervous system. When we understand that our deep connection to nature might come from ancestors who lived in harmony with the earth for thousands of years, or that intuitive healing abilities might be inherited from gifts from generations of traditional healers, we start to embrace these aspects of ourselves and take pride in them rather than confusion. Second, trauma narratives help us identify and activate inherited strengths. Yes. Every ancestor who survived long enough to pass on their genes also passed on their survival strategies, their wisdom, and absolutely their resilience. But consciously connecting with these ancestral gifts, we can draw upon resources that extend far beyond our individual capacities. and capabilities. Now, third, trauma narratives facilitate what psychodynamic theory calls working through, the process of consciously processing and integrating unconscious material. When when uh, when we can tell the story of how our ancestors' experiences shaped us, we really can gain the power to consciously choose what patterns to continue and then what patterns we want to transform. And finally, trauma narratives can create a sense of purpose and legacy. When we understand how trauma journeys are as part of our larger ancestral story, our individual gifts really help us grow, and it becomes an act of service, not just for ourselves, but for our ancestors who couldn't heal those patterns in their lifetime, and to the future generations who will inherit the fruits of our healing. So, let me share with you my personal trauma narrative story through the analysis of my raw genetic data from 23andMe using my true ancestry. I discovered that my DNA carries connections to over 16 ancient civilizations, each contributing to specific percentages of my genetic heritage. And even more importantly, specific healing gifts that flow through my blood and my bones today. This is my trauma narrative, a story that transforms inherited challenges into inherited wisdom, individual healing into generational transformation, and personal growth and ancestral service. As you listen to the journey, I invite you to consider your own ancestral connections and the healing gifts that might be, awakening within. So let's get ready to go on this journey with me.
So let's start at one of my beginnings 40,000 years ago with my Paleolithic hunter and gatherer ancestors who make up 2.1% of my DNA. Ooh, what the Paleolithic hunter and gatherers gave me in my blood was the foundation that all healing, the deep knowing that survival depends on these intimate connections with the natural world. These ancestors carried in their DNA the blueprint for human resiliency. Woo! They understood that healing was not separate from daily life, but woven into every aspect of existence. In my bones, I carry the gift of intuitive body awareness. When I feel the need to move my body, to spend time in nature, or to trust my instincts about what food will nourish me, I'm assessing the wisdom that is literally encoded in my cells. These ancestors survived things like the ice ages and migrations across continents and countless challenges that would just seem impossible to us today. They did so by developing exquisite sensitivity to their environment and an unshakable trust in their body's wisdom. The trauma narrative here is profound. These ancestors lived through periods of ultimate uncertainty, never knowing where their next meal would come from or what dangers they might face. Yet, they transformed this uncertainty into a superpower, the ability to be fully present, completely adaptable, and deeply connected to the rhythms of life itself. When I feel anxious about, let's say, my future, I can remember this anxiety is actually an inherited gift of, alertness, awareness, refined over thousands and thousands of generations, designed to keep me safe and to help me thrive. Woo! Beautiful. What I learned from these Paleolithic ancestors is that healing begins with returning to the body, returning to nature, and returning to the present moment. Their 2.1% contribution to my DNA carries the memory of humanity's original healing wisdoms, the understanding that we are just not separate from nature, but part of an interconnected web of life that supports and sustains us all. Now, let's move forward to about 10,000 BCE, where we encounter my Neolithic farmer ancestors who contributed to 1.9% of my DNA. What the Neolithic farmers gave me in my blood was the revolutionary understanding that humans can partner with Earth and really create abundance. These ancestors made one of the most significant traditions in our human history, from hunting and gathering to agriculture. The shift required not just new skills, but a completely different relationship with time and the seasons and even the cycles of growth and harvest. So in my bones, I carry the gift of patience, and faith in unseen processes. When I plant seeds in my garden, I'm assessing the same trust that the Neolithic ancestors had. The faith that if you prepare the soil, plant at the right time, tend with loving care, abundance, it will follow, and you'll produce these beautiful tomatoes and cucumbers. This is not just about the agriculture wisdom, but it's about a healing wisdom. These ancestors understood that healing, like farming, requires patience, proper timing, and that trust in just the natural processes. The trauma narrative of the Neolithic period involves the anxiety, really, of depending on props because they might fail, weather that might not cooperate, and the responsibility of feeding not just oneself, but an entire community. Yet these ancestors transformed this anxiety into a gift of things like planning and preparation and community cooperation. They learned that individual survival was less important than it was in terms of collective thriving. What I learned from these Neolithic ancestors is that true healing requires us to think beyond immediate relief, to move towards long-term transformation. Just as they learned to save seeds for the next year's planting, I've learned to invest in healing practices that might not show immediate results, but will, create lasting changes. So thank you for their 1.9% contribution to my DNA, carrying the memory of one of humanity's first leaps of faith, the belief that we could consistently participate in creating the conditions of life that allows us to just flourish. I was curious about this one in high school, and boop, it appeared. Now we travel to the ancient Mesopotamia, that Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria, where 4.7% of my DNA originates? I guess I should have did better in high school history classes. What the Mesopotamian civilization gave me in my blood really was the foundation, that understanding, the understanding of healing is really about the art and the science interconnection. My ancestors really developed, and should be given maybe credit to the things in terms of written medical texts, and they created hospitals and they established healing as a respectable profession. The goddess Gula, known as the great physician, presided over a really sophisticated system of healing, and that integrated spiritual practices with really practical medicine. So in my bones, I carry the gift of systematic healing knowledge. When I research different healing modalities or create protocols for my wellness practice, or even document my healing journey, I'm really assessing the same impulse that drove my Mesopotamian ancestors to create and contribute to some of the first medical libraries. They understood that healing wisdom needed to be preserved, It also needed to be shared and built upon across many generations. So the trauma narrative of the Mesopotamian really involves challenges of living in the world's maybe first cities, documented cities, healing from things like disease outbreaks. Ooh, sounds familiar in this current century. Social hierarchies and stress of just complex civilizations. Yet these ancestors really transformed these challenges into like innovations that still influence healing today. They developed some of the early pharmacies. Not quite what we are dealing with today. They look very much different. And they created and recreated detailed diagnostic procedures. They established the principles that healing should be accessible to all members of our society. Not just a few privileged. What the Mesopotamian civilization gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing is not just personal, but it's social. Their temples served as healing centers where physical, emotional, and spiritual needs were addressed together. They recognized that individual healing could not be separate from the community well-being. So their 4.7 contribution to my DNA carries the memory of humanity's first systematic approach to healing. The understanding that wellness requires both individual knowledge and some collective support. So what I've learned from these Mesopotamian ancestors is that effective healing requires both the intuition and the documentation, both the spiritual practice and the practical application. So when I combine things like meditation and research or blend ancient wisdom with modern understanding, I'm really honoring their legacy of integrated. Now, let's journey to the Indus Valley civilization, where what 5.1% of my DNA connects me to one of the history's most peaceful urban experiments. What the Indus Valley civilization gave me in my blood was really a profound understanding that healing just flows with harmony and balance. The ancestors who lived in what we now call Pakistan and the northwestern India from about 3,300 to about 1,300 BCE created one of the world's really most advanced urban civilization. What makes their contribution to my healing so significant is that archaeological evidence shows they lived with remarkably little violence, and social inequality. That's why I believe the way I believe. In my bones, I carry their gift of creating healing environments. The Indus Valley cities really had these featured, sophisticated drainage systems, and they had public baths and urban planning that really prioritized public health and well-being. So when I feel drawn to create peaceful, organized spaces for healing, or when I instinctively understand the connection between environmental harmony and personal wellness, I'm assessing the wisdom that really flows from these ancestors. The trauma narrative of the Indus Valley really involves the mystery of their disappearance. A civilization that thrived for nearly 2,000 years and then boop, vanished, possibly due to some climate change or some natural disasters. Yet what they left behind was the blueprint for sustainable, peaceful living. Their trauma became a gift to future generations. The understanding that true civilizations is measured not by conquest or accumulation, but how well a society cares for all of the members of the society. So thank you, because what the Indus Valley civilization gave me in my bones was really the understanding that healing happens best in environments of safety, equality, and mutual support. So their sophisticated water management systems reflect really a deep understanding that physical health depends on clean flowing water, a principle that applies not just to cities, but to the human body and the energetic system. So what I learned from these Indus Valley ancestors is that sustainable healing requires creating systems that support well-being for everyone, not just a privileged few. Their 5% contribution to my DNA carries the memory of humanity's most powerful urban experiments. The understanding that healing and harmony is not just an individual goal, but really it's a collective responsibility. Walk like an Egyptian. Ooh, yeah. I knew this one was going to show up. Now we come to probably one of my strongest connection, ancient Egypt, or Kemet, as it was originally known, as representing how much? 8% of my DNA? What ancient Egypt gave me in my blood was the deepest understanding of healing as really a sacred science that bridges the physical and spiritual realms. I carry within me the wisdom of Kemetic healing traditions that understood the human being as complex in an integration of the body, the mind, and the spirit. Ooh, what they called the physical body, Kat, or the vital energy, Ka, or the eternal soul, Ba. In my bones, I carry the gift of Kemetic meditation and the understanding that true healing begins with the mastery of movements of the mind. The ancient Kemetic text, the Kemetic diet, teaches watching your emotions, controlling them, and not allowing them to go to extremes is a what? Form of fasting for the filling aspect of the mind and the heart. You will notice that when you are tense or upset, the body assumes these constrictive poses and breathing becomes shallow. When this happens, you need to start taking control by practicing the proper and deep breathing techniques. Spiritual energy is dissipated through indiscriminate indulgences in the emotional behavior. Woo! This wisdom flows through my blood every time I turn to meditation in moments of stress, even when I'm not stressed. Every time I use breath work to regulate my nervous system, even when I don't need to regulate the nervous system. And every time I recognize that emotional bounding is the good foundation for physical health. The Kemetic understanding of Semetawi, the union of the upper and lower Egypt within the body, lives in the practice of yoga and the movement that integrates this earthly and divine aspects of being. What ancient Egypt gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing is not just about fixing what's broken, but about remembering our divine nature. The Kemetic temples were not just places of worship, they were really these sophisticated healing centers where the priests and the priestesses and physicians really use things like sound healing and plant medicine and energy work and spiritual counseling to restore wholeness back to the community. So when I feel drawn to create sacred spaces for healing, when I understand the power of ritual and ceremony, when I know intuitively that healing must address the whole person, I'm assessing the wisdom of my Kemetic ancestors. So the trauma narrative of ancient Egypt involves the challenges of maintaining spiritual wisdom through thousands and thousands of years of foreign invasions and cultural suppression and the gradual loss of some of our original Kemetic teachings. Yet what survived in my DNA is this unshakable knowing that every human being carries divine potential and that healing is ultimately about awakening our true nature. Know thyself. What I learned from my ancient Egyptian ancestors is that meditation is not just a practice, but a way of life. And the body is a temple deserving of reverence and care. And that true healing happens when we align our individual will with our divine will. Thank you. Their 8.7% contribution to my DNA carries the memory of humanity's most sophisticated understanding of consciousness and healing. The knowledge that we are spiritual beings having a human experience and that remembering the truth is the ultimate healing. Now we come to my strongest European connection. Ireland, representing 12.3% of my DNA. What the eclectic Irish gave me in my blood was really the deepest connection of the healing power of the natural world and the understanding that Earth itself is alive, it's conscious, and it is eager to support our healing journey, flowing from the Emerald Hills and sacred groves of Ireland. I carry within me the wisdom of the Druids and the ancient eclectic understanding that healing happens through relationships with the living world. In my bones, I carry the gift of boundary protection and the fierce love that defends what is sacred. The eclectic tradition understood that healing requires both an opening and a protecting. Ooh, I hear boundaries. Opening to receive the gifts of nature and spirit while maintaining strong energetic boundaries against what would harm us or deplete us. So when I feel the need to protect my energy, to create a sacred space, or to stand firm in my values, I'm assessing the warrior healer wisdom of my eclectic ancestors. What the Irish gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing happens in sacred relationships with the elements. The eclectics recognize that each element, earth, water, fire, and air, carried specific healing properties that humans' wellness depended on for maintaining things like balance with all four of them. Their stone circles and sacred wells, they really were amazing because these wells were not just monuments, but healing technologies that help people align with the natural rhythms and the cosmic energies. Ooh, I'm even seeing other connections now. The narrative of the eclectic Ireland really involves centuries of invasions, colonizations, and systematic suppression of these really indigenous wisdom traditions. The Druids, who were the keepers of healing knowledge, were specifically targeted for elimination because colonizers understood that destroying the healers would break, the spiritual backbone of the people. Yet what survived in my DNA is the unbreakable connection to the land and to the knowing that true healing comes from remembering our place in the web of life. What the eclectic Irish gave me in my blood was the gift of storytelling as a healing medicine. The eclectic tradition understood that stories carry medicine, that myths and legends are really not just for entertainment, but they have healing technologies that help us understand our place in this cosmic story. So when I feel drawn to share healing stories, when I understand the power of narrative to transform trauma, when I know that my personal healing journey is part of a larger collective story, that's what I'm assessing the wisdom of my eclectic ancestors. What I've learned from my Irish ancestors is that healing requires both wildness and wisdom, both fierce protection and open-hearted love. Thank you for their 12.3% contribution to my DNA. It carries the memory of a people who understood that Earth is our first teacher, that nature is our most reliable healer, and that our individual wellness is inseparable from the wellness of the land itself. Now, let's move to Northern Europe, where we encounter my Germanic tribal ancestors, contributing to 11.8% of my DNA. What the Germanic tribes gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing requires both this individual strength and some tribal loyalty, both personal power and collective responsibility, flowing from the forests and all the way through Northern Europe. I carry within me the blood and wisdom of the peoples, who understood that survival depended on this fierce independence and really an unbreakable community bond. So in my bones, I carry the gifts of herbal medicine, and the deep knowing that the forest is a living pharmacy. Germanic healing traditions were built around these intimate knowledge of their local plants, their trees, these natural remedies. So when I feel drawn to things like herbalism, when I trust in my intuition about which plants will support my healing, when I really understand that different seasons require different medicines, that's when I'm assessing the wisdom that flows from my Germanic ancestors. So what these tribes gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing sometimes requires this warrior energy and the willingness to fight for what matters, to defend the vulnerable, and to stand strong in the face of adversity. Their healing traditions included not just these gentle remedies, but also the understanding that sometimes, healing requires courage, determination, and the willingness to face difficult truths. The trauma narrative of the Germanic tribes understood that challenges of living in these harsh northern climates, dealing with constant tribal conflicts, I could only imagine, and eventually facing the expansion of the Roman Empire. Yet these ancestors transformed these challenges into strengths that still serve me today. They developed incredible resilience, deep loyalty to their communities, and a sophisticated knowledge of how to thrive in challenging environments. So what the Germanic tribes gave me in my blood was the gift of seasonal healing wisdom. Living in climates with dramatic seasonal changes, these ancestors understood that healing practices really need things like adaptation to natural cycles. They knew which herbs to gather for spring in order to do cleansing, what foods to preserve for their winter strength, and how to use energy for each season to support aspects of healing. So what I learned from my Germanic ancestors is that true healing requires both this gentleness and this strength, both individual empowerment and community support. So thank you. They're 11.8% of my contribution to my DNA carries the memories of people who understood that healing is not just about feeling good, but it's about developing resilience and wisdom really needed to thrive in these unpredictable conditions of the world. Thank you. Now, we are going to journey to ancient Greece, where 9% of my DNA connects me to the birthplace of Western philosophy and medicine. What the ancient Greeks gave me in my blood was this kind of revolutionary understanding that healing requires both rational inquiry and spiritual wisdom, both scientific observation and philosophical reflection. So what I carry within me is the wisdom of Hippocrates, who kind of established, or at least was given credit to, some of the healing principles like do no harm and the understanding that true medicine addresses the whole person and not just the symptoms. In my bones, I carry the gift of the Socratic method applied to its healing principles. It's really the understanding that the most powerful healing questions are often, what do we think is causing this? Or, what do we believe could help? The Greek tradition of healing recognized that patients are not passive recipients of treatment, but they really should be active participants in their own healing. So what the ancient Greeks gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing is kind of an art and a science. It requires both technical knowledge and this intuitive wisdom. The Greek healing temples were really sophisticated healing systems, and they did combine medical treatment with things like dream work, They had therapeutic theater and they did spiritual counseling. So when I understanding that healing requires addressing both the practical and the spiritual needs, that's when I'm assessing the wisdom of my Greek ancestors. The trauma narrative of the ancient Greeks involves this constant warfare between cities and states and the challenges of maintaining democratic ideas and eventually the conquest by Rome. Yet these ancestors transformed these challenges into philosophical and medical innovations that still influence healing today. They continued the development of systematic approaches to medicine, education, and they established the principle of medical ethics, which they got from the Egyptians and created the foundation of evidence-based healing practices. So what the ancient Greeks gave me in my blood was the gift of balance and moderation in healing. The Greeks really had this idea of wise moderation, understanding that healing happens not through these extremes, but through finding a middle path. I wonder if they got that from my aunt. When I avoid healing fads, which I don't like, and instead focus on things that are sustainable, balanced approaches to wellness, that's when I'm honoring the wisdom of my Greek ancestors. So what I learned from my ancient Greek ancestors is that effective healing requires both the head and the heart, both rational analysis and intuitive wisdom. Their 9.2% contribution to my DNA carries the memory of a civilization that really understood healing as the highest form of human knowledge. And with the integration of the science, philosophy, and spiritual wisdom in service of human flourishing. Now here's where I have to get the intellect out of the way and think about it from a strength perspective. So we're going to move now to the Roman Empire, where the Romans are 8.1% of my DNA, really connects me to the civilization that collaborated and built the world's first global healthcare system. So what the Roman Empire gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing knowledge becomes most powerful when it is systemized, when it is shared, and when it is accessible to diverse populations. I carry within me the wisdom of ancestors who understood individual healing and public health. They're not inseparable. In my bones, I carry the gift of practical healing implementation. The Romans, you see, were master integrators who took the best knowledge from every culture they encountered. Here, Greek medicine. Here, Egyptian surgery. Here, Germanic herbalism. Here, eclectic energy work. And created a comprehensive healing system that could serve millions and millions of people. So when I feel drawn to combine different healing modalities, when I understand that effective healing requires both ancient wisdom and a practical application, that's when I'm assessing the wisdom of my Roman ancestors. What the Roman Empire gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing infrastructure, it matters. Romans built some of the first hospitals, the medical schools, public health systems. You see, they understood that individual healing happens best within a supportive community-based systems. So when I advocate for things like accessible healthcare, that's when I understand that healing is a human right. When I work to create healing resources for my community, that's when I'm honoring the legacy of my Roman ancestors. So the trauma narrative of the Roman Empire involves the challenges of maintaining unity across maybe vast distances and diverse cultures, dealing with constant military conflicts, and eventually facing the collapse of a system that they built. Yet what survived in my DNA is the understanding that healing knowledge really belongs to all humanity, and that our individual wellness is connected to the wellness of the larger community. So what the Roman Empire gave me in my blood was the gift of healing leadership and administration. The Romans understood that effective healing requires not just individual practitioners, but more of an organized system that can train healers and distribute resources, and even ensure that healing knowledge is really preserved and transmitted across generations. So what I learned from my Roman ancestors is that sustainable healing requires both individual practice and a systematic change, both personal transformation and a collective action. So thank you, 8.1% contribution to my DNA, really carrying the memory of a civilization that understood healing as both a personal journey and a social responsibility. Now, not as shocked by this one, so we're going to venture to Scandinavian, where 7% of my DNA flows from the Viking and Norse people. What the Viking and Norse people gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing, and that warrior energy are not opposites, but complementary forces that both serve life. Flowing from the fjords and the forests of Scandinavia, I carry within me the wisdom of ancestors who really understood that sometimes healing requires this fierce protection of what is sacred, and the courage to venture into these unknown territories. So in my bones, I carry the gift of boundary protection and the understanding that healthy boundaries, they really are essential for healing. The Norse tradition recognized that healers needed to be warriors, not in the sense of causing harm, but in the sense of being willing to fight for what serves life and to protect the vulnerable from what could harm them. When I feel the need to set these strong boundaries around my energy or my time, even my healing practices, that's when I'm assessing the warrior healer wisdom energy within the Norse ancestors. What the Viking people gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing sometimes requires journeying to the unknown. The Norse, they were master navigators who ventured across dangerous seas to discover new lands. Their healing traditions included shamanic journeying and working with plant allies, and understanding that healing often requires us to travel into the depths of our own psyche to retrieve lost parts of ourselves. The trauma narrative of the Viking people involves the challenges really of living in these harsh northern climates, dealing with limited resources, and the eventual Christianization that suppressed many of the indigenous healing traditions. Yet, what survived in my DNA is the unshakable understanding that healing requires both courage and wisdom, both individual strength and community support. What the Vikings, Norse people gave me in my blood was the gift of seasonal healing wisdom and the understanding that different times require different medicines, living in climates with extreme seasonal variations. These ancestors developed sophisticated knowledge on how to use energy with each season and to support different aspects of healing and growth. So what I learned from the Viking and North ancestors is that effective healing requires both this gentleness, and this fierceness, both receptivity and protection. 7.4% contribution to my DNA carries the memories of people who understood that healing is not passive, but active. Not just about receiving, but also about defending what is sacred and venturing courageously into new territories of what possibilities? This one. It was a surprise, but it was a welcomed expression. We're going to travel to ancient China. We find 6.5% of my DNA connected to the Han Dynasty and one of history's most sophisticated healing traditions. What the Han Dynasty Chinese gave me in my blood was this profound understanding that healing happens through balancing these opposing forces and aligning individual energy with, those cosmic rhythms. I carry within me the wisdom of traditional Chinese medicine, which understood that the human body as a microcosm of the universe itself. So in these bones, I carry the gift of energy awareness and the understanding that healing happens through working with qi, the vital life force that flows through all living things. The Han Dynasty, they developed things like agriculture and herbal medicine and qigong practices that are still used today because they are based on these things, these timeless principles of energy, flow and balance. So when I feel drawn to practices that cultivate and balance energy, when I understand that healing requires attention of both the physical and the energetic aspects of health, I'm assessing the wisdom of my Chinese ancestors. What the Han Dynasty gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing requires patience and consistency and attention and the subtle changes over time. You see, Chinese medicine recognizes that true healing happens gradually through small daily practices that accumulate into profound transformation. So when I commit to my daily meditation, when I understand that healing is a lifelong journey rather than a quick fix, that's when I'm honoring the wisdom of my Chinese ancestors. The trauma narrative of the Han Dynasty involved the challenges of unifying a vast empire, dealing with natural disasters and really maintaining cultural continuity through periods of political upheaval. Yet, these ancestors transformed these challenges into healing wisdom that emphasized adaptability, and resilience. That's where it comes from. And the importance of maintaining harmony even in difficult circumstances. So what the Han Dynasty Chinese gave me in my blood was the gift of preventative medicine and understanding that the best healing happens before illness manifests. Chinese medicine focuses on maintaining health and preventing disease through things like lifestyle changes, dietary therapy, and energy cultivation. So when I prioritize prevention over treatment, when I understand that small daily choices have cumulative effects on my health, that's when I'm assessing the wisdom of my Chinese ancestors. What I've learned from the Han Dynasty ancestors is that effective healing requires both action and receptivity, both effort and surrender. Thank you. That 6.5% contribution to this DNA carries the memory of a civilization that understood healing as the art of living in harmony with the natural law and that cosmic rhythm. Thank you. Oh yeah, we're traveling. We're going to journey to the heart of where? Africa, where 7.2% of my DNA connects me to the Bantu people. What the Bantu people gave me in my blood was this deep understanding that healing is not just this individual journey, but a collective community responsibility. And that the health of each person is inseparable from the health of the whole community. Flowing from the heart of Africa, I carry within me the wisdom of ancestors who really understood that healing happens through relationships and rituals and the active participation with just the entire community. So in my bones, I carry the gift of ancestral healing and the understanding that our ancestors are not just gone, but they really continue to guide and support our healing journey. You see, the Bantu tradition recognizes that healing often requires addressing not just symptoms, but these ancestral patterns that have been passed down and down from generation to generation. So when I feel drawn to explore family patterns, when I understand that my healing serves not just me, but an entire ancestral line, That's when I'm assessing the wisdom of the Bantu ancestors. What the Bantu people gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing happens through rhythm and song and movement. Bantu healing traditions include things like drumming and dancing and singing as essential, really healing technologies that help people restore balance to both the individual and to the community. So when I feel the healing power of music, when I understand that movement can shift stuck energy, or when I know that singing and humming can open up the heart and clear emotional blockages. Having the flow of the throat chakra, I'm assessing the wisdom that flows through my blood like my Bantu ancestors. So the trauma narrative of the Bantu people involves the challenges of things like migration across these vast distances, adapting to new environments, and later facing the devastating impacts of colonization, even the slave trade. Yet, what survived in my DNA is an unbreakable understanding that healing happens through community support, that individual strength comes from collective wisdom, and that no one, and I'll say this again, that no one heals alone. What the Bantu people gave me in my blood was the gift of plant medicine wisdom and the understanding that the earth provides every single thing that we need in order to heal. It gives us everything we need. So you see, Bantu healing traditions really included the sophisticated knowledge of plant medicine and the understanding that different plants serve different healing purposes, even the recognition that plant medicine works best when it's combined with spiritual practices. Oh, and community support. Oh, great. I like it. So what I learned from my Bantu ancestors is that effective healing requires both that individual commitment and that community support, both personal practice, and collective rituals. So thank you for my 7.2% of that contribution to my DNA, carrying the memory of people who understood that healing is not just a luxury, but it is a necessity, not an individual pursuit, but a community responsibility. And that the ultimate goal of healing is not just personal wellness, but the restoration of harmony within the entire web of life. Thank you. This is getting so fun. Now we move to West Africa, where we encounter the great kingdoms where how much? 6.8% of my DNA originates from. What the West African kingdoms gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing, that's right, knowledge is royal knowledge, that healers hold both positions of great responsibility and honor, and that effective healing requires both individual skill and institutional support. Connected to the great pyramids of Mali and Songhai and Ghana, I carry within me the wisdom of ancestors who created some of history's most sophisticated healing systems. So in my bones, I carry the gift of scholarly healing and the understanding that effective healing requires both traditional wisdom and a continuous learning. You see, the University of Timbuktu, established during the Mali Empire, was one of the world's first centers of medical education, where healers study not just local traditions, but healing knowledge from across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. So, when I feel drawn to study different healing modalities, when I understand that effective healing requires both that ancient wisdom and that current knowledge, That's what I'm assessing the wisdom from my West African ancestors. What West African kingdoms gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing and leadership, boy, they are inseparable. That those who heal others must also be able to heal communities and societies. The royal healing traditions of these empires included not just individual treatment, but also public health measures, community healing rituals, and the understanding that the health of the ruler affected the health of the entire kingdom. So the trauma narrative of the West African kingdoms involves the challenges of maintaining vast trade networks, dealing with environmental changes like desertification, the process by which there's fertile land becomes desert. Ooh, that's not good. Typically as a result of drought or deforestation or inappropriate agriculture, such as what happened in parts of the Sahara region, and eventually facing the devastating impacts of the Atlantic slave trade. Yet, what survived in this DNA is the understanding that healing knowledge is precious and must be preserved. That healers have the responsibility to serve not just individuals, but entire communities. That true healing creates abundance that can be shared across and across and across various networks. So what the West African kingdoms gave me in my bones was the gift of integrative healing and understanding that the best healing systems draw wisdom from multiple traditions. These empires were crossroads of trade and culture where healing knowledge from across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond, they were integrated into these comprehensive healing systems. So when I feel drawn to combine different healing approaches, when I understand that no single tradition has all the answers, I'm honoring the wisdom of my West African ancestors. What I've learned from my West African ancestors is that effective healing, it requires both individual mastery. Oh, that's where that comes from. And institutional support, both traditional wisdom and innovative adaptation. So their 6.8 contribution to my DNA carries the memory of civilizations that understood healing as both a sacred calling and a practical necessity, both an individual skill and a collective responsibility. Boy, it's not over yet. I just feel like I'm traveling all around the world. Now we're going to the Ethiopian highlands, where 4.3% of my DNA connected to the roof of Africa. What the Ethiopian highlands gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing, yes, healing, it requires this elevation and grounding, both reaching toward the divine, and staying connected to earth. Flowing from the roof of Africa, I carry within me the wisdom of ancestors who've lived at high altitudes where the air is thin. That sun, it is intense, and survival requires both this physical resilience, and does it require this spiritual strength. In my bones, I carry the gift of endurance and the understanding that healing is not a sprint, but a marathon that requires some pacing, some patience, and some ability to maintain steady progress, even when, especially when, the path is difficult. The Ethiopian highlands taught my ancestors that healing, like mountain climbing, requires preparation and adaptability, both individual strength and that community support. I'm seeing some themes here. What the Ethiopian highlands gave me in my bones was the understanding that healing traditions can survive even the most challenging circumstances. Ethiopia is one of the few African countries that were never really fully colonized. And as a result, many ancient healing traditions survived survived intact, when I feel drawn to preserve traditional healing knowledge, when I understand the importance of maintaining cultural continuity, I am assessing the wisdom of my Ethiopian ancestors. The trauma narrative of the Ethiopian highlands involves the challenges of living in these harsh mountain environment and dealing with periodic droughts and famines and maintaining independence in the face of these repeated invasion attempts. Yet, these ancestors transformed these challenges into strengths that still serve me today. There's an incredible resilience, a deep spiritual faith, and the understanding that healing requires both individual effort and a divine grace. What the Ethiopian highlands gave me in my blood was the gift of coffee culture, and the understanding that certain plants can serve as both medicine and sacrament. Ethiopian coffee ceremonies are healing rituals that bring communities together. They also create sacred space, and they use the stimulating properties of coffee to enhance both the physical energy and the spiritual awareness. What I learned from my Ethiopian ancestors is that effective healing requires both altitude and aptitude, both the ability to rise above immediate circumstances and the wisdom to stay grounded in practical reality. I like it. Thank you for that 4.3% contribution to my DNA, because it carries the memories of people who understood that healing happens at the intersection of earth and sky, human effort, and boy, is there divine grace. Okay, so now we're going to move along the Nile as we encounter the Nubian kingdoms, where 3.9% of my DNA originates. What the Nubian kingdoms gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing, it flows like a river, connecting our different lands and peoples, really while maintaining its essential nature, connected to the ancient kingdoms of Kush and Meroe. I carry within me the wisdom of ancestors who have served as bridges between healing traditions of Egypt and the sub-Sahara Africa. So, in these bones, I carry the gift of cultural integration and the understanding that the most powerful healing happens when different traditions are respectfully combined. The Nubian kingdoms were master synthesizers who took the best of Egyptian healing knowledge and they really combined it with indigenous African traditions to create something new, even powerful. So when I feel drawn to integrate different healing modalities, when I understand that healing wisdom transcends cultural boundaries, I'm assessing the wisdom of my Nubian ancestors. What the Nubian kingdoms gave me in my blood was the understanding that healing, it requires this royal dignity and humble service. The Nubian pharaohs were known for their commitment to justice and their care for all members of the society, not just the elite. Their healing traditions, they emphasize that true healers serve all people, regardless of social status. The trauma narrative of the Nubian kingdom involved the challenges of maintaining independence between these powerful empires of Egypt and Ethiopian, dealing with gradual desertification of their homeland, eventually facing conquest and cultural suppression. Yet what survived in my DNA is the understanding that healing knowledge is like a water. It finds a way to flow even when the surface channels are blocked. So what the Nubian kingdoms gave me in my bones was the gift of temple healing. Thank you very much. The gift of temple healing, which were really these sophisticated and sacred healing centers that combine medical treatment and spiritual practices, recognizing that healing happens most effectively when there are environments that honor both the physical and the spiritual aspects of nature. What I learned from my Nubian ancestors What I learned is that effective healing requires both strength and flexibility, both cultural pride and openness to learning from others. Oh, thank you, 3.9% contribution in this DNA, carrying the memory of peoples who understood that healing, oh yes, it's like a river. It must keep flowing to stay alive, and it becomes most powerful when different streams, they just join together.
As we sit here today, feeling the wisdom of these ancestral streams flowing through my blood and my bones. I understand that my current and interests, it's not a random preference, but ancestral memories of really awakening within me. My deep connection to ancient Egyptian spirituality and meditation practices is not just a personal interest, but the 8.7% of my DNA that carries the memory and wisdom of the Kemetic wisdom, calling me home to practices that my ancestors really knew intimately. My growing attraction to my Irish heritage and my instinctive understanding of boundary protection reflects that 12.3% of my DNA, really that carries that eclectic wisdom, the understanding that healing requires both opening to receive the gifts of nature and spirit while maintaining strong energetic boundaries against what could harm or deplete us. My passion for farming and healthy nutrition is not just a modern health trend, but the awakening of ancestral memories from my Neolithic farmers, that 1.9% of my Bantu agriculture ancestors, the 7.2%, and all the civilizations that really understood that healing begins with our relationship to food, with the food we eat, and the land we sustain. What all of these ancestral streams have given me in my blood is the understanding that healing is not just personal, but it is really generational. Not just individual, but collective. Every time I choose healing over harm, growth over stagnation, love over fear, I am not just healing myself, I am healing the ancestral patterns that have been waiting for someone in my lineage to transform them. What all these ancestral streams have given me in my bones is the understanding that I am not alone in my healing journey. I carry within me the wisdom, strength, and resilience of thousands of generations of ancestors who have faced their own challenges, and they have found ways not just to survive, but to thrive. Their gifts in my DNA, that's where it lives. Their wisdom flows through my blood, and their love, yes, it supports me in every moment. This trauma narrative has shown me that what once I experienced as a personal challenge is actually an inherited patterns that survived, and they really served my ancestors well in their circumstances. But maybe some of their stuff I don't need because it's no longer useful for me. My anxiety is not a personal failing, but maybe an inherited gift of awareness that helped my ancestors survive dangerous situations. My sensitivity is not a weakness, but an inherited gift of perception that helped my ancestors navigate complex social and environmental challenges. The healing journey is not about eliminating these inherited gifts, but about consciously choosing which ones to continue and which ones to transform. When I practice my Kemetic meditations, I'm honoring my Egyptian ancestors while adapting their wisdom to my current circumstances. When I create strong boundaries, I'm honoring my eclectic ancestors while applying their knowledge to my modern challenges. When I grow my own food, I'm honoring my agriculture ancestors while adapting their wisdom to contemporary life. What this trauma narrative has taught me is that healing is not just about feeling better, but about becoming a conscious participant in the evolutionary change of consciousness itself. Every pattern I heal, every trauma I transform, every gift I develop becomes part of the legacy I pass to the future generations. My individual healing journey is actually a collective healing journey that serves not just me, but my ancestors who couldn't heal these patterns in their lifetime, and the descendants who will inherit the fruits of my healing. So, as I share my trauma narrative with you, I invite you to consider your own ancestral connections and the healing gifts that might be awakening within you. Every human being carries within their DNA the wisdom of multiple civilizations, the strength of countless ancestors, and the potential to transform inherited challenges really into inherited gifts. And if this story resonates with you, if you feel the call to explore your own ancestral healing journey, if you're interested in creating your own trauma narrative or doing intergenerational trauma work, I encourage you to begin by simply asking, what gifts might my ancestors have given me? What wisdom flows through my blood? What healing potential lives in my bones? Their journey, or the journey of ancestral healing, is not about living in the past, but about bringing the best of the past into the present to create a better future. It's about recognizing that we are not isolated individuals struggling alone, but part of an unbroken chain of ancestors and descendants, all connected to the great web of healing that spans across time and space. Your ancestors are not gone. They live in your DNA. They speak through your intuition, and they support your healing journey in ways you don't even recognize. The healing within you today, it can serve you in this entire web of life in which you are a part of. This is the gift of a trauma narrative. The understanding of our individual healing is actually a collective healing, that our personal transformation is actually a generational transformation, and that the work that we do to heal ourselves is actually the work we do to heal the world. The healing wisdom of your ancestors is awakening for you to remember it, to claim it, and to use it in service of the healing of our world, because there is so much need. Our world is in desperate need of true, authentic healers who are really reconnecting and remembering this. The trauma narrative is not just your story, it is a story of healing itself, awakening in with you and through you, and to benefit you in life. The gifts of our ancestors are waiting for you to give it. What healing wisdom flows through your blood, when transformation is your healing narrative, it is calling you to create. The journey begins with the simple question: who are you? Really, who are you? When you begin to remember, you carry within you the wisdom of all who came before you. Your ancestors, they're calling. The healing journey is awaiting. The transformation of trauma into wisdom, the inherited trauma of inherited gifts, the individual healing into collective healing. This is the work of our time. And you, when you're ready, I'm here to help. So I welcome you to doing an ancestral healing journey. Welcome to a trauma narrative, and welcome to remembering who you really are. If this message resonates with you and you are interested in doing this work, consider reaching out to me. I offer free consultations, and we can talk about the next steps that could align with your healing journey. Thank you.